We at Survivor Corrections Without a Union was not created to remove our union COBRA. We believe in unionization and the right to unionize. It's a platform that helps you to survive the Department of Corrections when those who fiduciary responsibility to work in your best interest does not. Welcome to Survivor Corrections Without a Union. I'm with guest, recently retired Albert Craig. Views and opinions expressed in this video are not that of the host and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of Survivor Corrections Without a Union. The views and opinions are of the guests and the guests alone.
Thanks for having me, first of all.
Absolutely.
Basically, I'm coming here because of my concern for these officers. It still hasn't stopped. Even after 26 years of doing this job, you're reading the newspapers, and from just retiring recently, there's so many things that troubled me. But as you know, unfortunately, a lot of the membership, a lot of the officers are so beaten down that they don't really have an outlet to speak about it. Mm-hmm. Because as soon as this guy, Molina, came in, he put out this memo saying that officers could not speak publicly, right. Online. They would face termination. They even put even more fear on these officers from exposing the plight that they exist in now. Mm-hmm. So yeah, one of the things that really bothers me is the stance that the union is taking with this guy Molina. Mm-hmm. Right? It amazes me. The president of the union was screaming and yelling about Commissioner Brand. He was screaming and yelling about, she must go, and what's the other guy? Schiraldi must go. Mm-hmm. And nothing from this guy. In fact, he put out a memo when the officer got stabbed 15 times, right, thanking the mayor and the commissioner for coming to the hospital.
Right. That was a horrible situation.
Yes, it was. But all of this started because of they have to close Rikers Island. Mm-hmm. And I've been saying this for, as you know, for quite some time.
Long time, yeah.
Right, they want to do it. They have to do it. They have to do it. And one of the things they could not do was have all these officers working. Mm. So they set these conditions where these officers can't live.
Right.
They just can't live. The reality is there's things that could be done to make it safer. It's one thing that everybody that works in corrections knows what the issues are, but what are we doing to stop it? Right. When I say we, even though I'm not there any longer, I care about these officers. What can they do? Mm-hmm. And so I came here today just to express my views, and hopefully, it would galvanize these officers. And you don't need everybody. Right. You just need a few that's willing to take this to court and file suits because of their rights being violated. Mm-hmm. Like one of the rights, how can we have a job, and we talking about since Molina's been there, how can we have a job where people aren't allowed to eat?
Right.
Right?
As far as going out to meal and at least getting a break. Basically.
Right. Their safety is constantly at risk. Mm-hmm. Right? These conditions are deplorable. You've been there a year. Mm-hmm. What have you done to make it better?
Right.
Right? You came in, you installed a unit, right? But you're so driven and satisfying this federal monitor who's done an awful job, a god-awful job, right? And enforcing the agreement.
Right.
So what did they do? They blamed the officers for everything.
Right.
Not coming to work. But who would want to come to work? And I'm not even saying that they're faking or not. I don't know.
Right.
I know I've seen a lot of officers beaten senseless, right? Surrounded for years. We're not talking about 6 months. We're talking about for the last couple of years, officers have been surrounded, and beaten. Inmates getting high in front of them. Mm-hmm. They report it. Management has done nothing about it. So it's a lot of things.
Right. What you think the officers should be doing in the effort to help themselves?
Number one, they have to get past their inability to stand up. Right. They need to require more from their union. The union is non-existent. Mm-hmm. But what they need to do is start suing. For example, right? They called a state of emergency. Right? A state of emergency don't last forever. Mm-hmm. Right? How could you have a state of emergency? You took over a year ago, and you have had a state of emergency for 1 whole year.
Right.
What are you doing to correct it?
Mm-hmm.
So what can the officers do? And that's litigate.
Right.
The commissioner, right? The commissioner of Department of Corrections, for the last year, there hasn't been a continual meal relief schedule.
Right.
That's against labor laws. Mm-hmm. That's the reason why unions were formed. Right? Safety conditions. So what can you do? Number one, you start suing for your right to get a meal. Mm-hmm. You have to be established that you have rights too. Right. So what are your rights? Your right is to a meal. Your right is to get assistance. You are a first responder, right? So why aren't you being held, why isn't the department being held to the same standard that PD is?
Right.
The Federal Monitor comes out with this thing, his what do you call them? His reports, and then he says we are too reliant on probe teams. Okay, we're too reliant on probe teams. You would not tell a cop not to call for assistance.
Yeah.
How ridiculous is that?
It's ridiculous.
That you would not tell a cop who needs assistance not to call it. Mm-hmm. They have failed these officers. You remember I appeared on New York One, and I talked about this false narrative that they pushed.
Right.
That officers need to come to work. It was started first by the union.
Right.
Who said the officers don't coming to work, they're not coming to work.
Who in the union?
Well, you had the president. Mm-hmm. The president of COBA and his minions on the internet pushed a narrative. But when you look at the history of the Schiraldi, you'll see that Schiraldi did it in Washington. Right. He went there and fired officers, right? Fired staff without cause.
Right.
So his main thing is always to blame staff, right? So I don't want to get too far away from what we should be doing.
Right. Get to it.
So you got a state of emergency. You have a call for a state of emergency. So that means things are so extreme that the Department of Corrections and the commissioner, Molina, had to take these outrageous actions, right? He pretty much threw away our contract and said, you're going to come to work when I want you to come to work, mm-hmm. right? You're going to do all of these things that I need you to do, right?
Right.
Or you face termination.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Right? So, what happened? You had officers working 3 tours, some 4 tours, right? They were forced to use their vacation time to work a tour that legally
they couldn't work.
Mm-hmm. So now officers expended all of these paid vacation days,
right,
to get out of working a tour that legally they couldn't work.
Oh, you talk about an example like when they was doing the 16-hour tours, the 18-hour tours.
Yes.
There was no way you could come right back.
No.
But if you take a time due, it comes from your time.
But if it's a state of emergency,
mm-hmm.
why am I paying you for your shortcomings?
Right. Gotcha.
So to get around it, they blamed the officers. They said, oh, the officers were not coming to work. When you and I both know that many of these officers have resigned and they kept them on the payroll. Right? This is what actually happened. They kept them on the payroll. The union said nothing because the union was still getting
But they did stipend?
not the stipend. They were getting annuity funds
Right.
from the city. So if I'm not working, and because officers were still getting paid,
Right.
some officers were still geting paid.
I heard they was too. I
Yeah,
heard that.
there was no remark for the New York One story that we did.
Right.
That that was done. It was none. So now, what actions do you take? You have to sue for those vacation days.
Right.
You also lost days, officers who weren't fit for duty. After working 4 days or 3 days or 2 days of 16, 24, 36 hours straight, how cognizant, alert were you?
Right. Right. Oh, you're talking about them getting hit with charges for procedural violations.
Yes, not just yes. I'm not sharp. You on the post 4 days of 16 hours. You on the post you on the post working 36 hours, and they're writing you up.
Right.
They're writing you up and taking your days. You need to sue for those days.
Right.
Right? So, okay. So between me taking my days to work a tour for working a tour because it's a state of emergency.
Right.
The union didn't require them to say no. Until you fix this, you're not going to take our officers' vacation days. How do you bully me into working a tour, right? Take my vacation for working a tour that I can't work, right? So to get my tour off after working 24 hours,
Right.
right? Now you say, well, somebody got to pay for this. So you take my days for that.
Right.
Then while I'm barely can stay alert, you say, you know what we're going to do? We're going to write you up for everything the inmate does. Or if you leave a door open, I know you're not alert, but I'm going to take those days too,
Anyway.
right? Then I'm not going to give you a meal relief on top of that and violate that,
Right.
right? So now I'm going to take, and then I'm not going to give you those 40 minutes. I'm not going to give you that either.
Not gonna pay you for it.
I'm not going to pay
Compensate
you
at
for
all.
it. But we in a state of emergency, but you have to understand we got to take actions that are necessary. But you did nothing to compensate me, but take my vacation days and heap all the blame on me.
Right. That seems inhumane to the officers.
Listen, there's no coincidence. I don't care. I'm gonna be very blunt. A lot of people are screaming and yelling because Molina's Hispanic.
Right.
But guess what? These officers who are suffering, many of them are Hispanics.
Right.
Their kids are Hispanics. Their wives and husbands are Hispanic.
Yep.
The union, this love affair that they have with this guy, they're not requiring that he get rid of this a state of emergency that we in. He's not requiring it. And, so the officers, a group of them have to get together and file lawsuits.
Right.
These are very winnable lawsuits. Again, you made me in a state of emergency. You took my vacation days when I wasn't alert. I wasn't even fit for duty. But you made me stay on a post fighting sleep.
Right.
Sleep deprivation, right? And you hit me for procedural violations when you knew I wasn't fit for duty.
Right.
You then made me spend my vacation days to get sleep at all. This is the crazy part. If what you're telling me is, listen to the logic. If I said I worked 24 hours and my tour came back, if I said I'm not going to give you the one vacation day to get that tour off, so you telling me you could keep me there for 4 straight days around the clock without sleep?
Right.
If I had refused to give you that
Them
day,
Right.
You can say, well, you're not going home unless you agree.
Right. Because it affects your vacation days. Basically,
Yes.
spending your time.
And so now you have officers in arrears. Officers who owe days, but didn't get any vacation. So you have that, and those are all lawsuits. The city needs to be held accountable. Also, the federal monitor needs to be held accountable.
Right.
Nunez says there's supposed to have been a higher officer to inmate ratio. That's the reason why they blame the officers.
Right.
They blame the officers because you can't have officers working continuously. You cannot have officers working continuously and say, oh, we're not going to hire.
Right.
So they had to push the narrative that we have enough staff, they just not coming to work. So look at what we're doing. We're blaming the officers for office, but then the president of the union gets on TV and says we have 3,000 that resign. So you knew that was a lie.
Right.
Right.
Because that's a mathematic problem. It's simple.
Right. You knew it. You have over 3,000 resigned that you allowed them to push a narrative that officers wasn't coming to work. So now that leads to these investigators showing up at your door.
Right.
Which, by the way, if investigators are showing up in your door, do you have a right to legal representation? Because if you came there, if I was under investigation for use of force, I could refer you to my
Counsel
lawyer.
or whatever. Yeah.
So you got an investigator investigating me, but I have no representation. So
That's a problem. That's an issue that has to be addressed, obviously.
yeah, it has to be addressed.
So with the way the department is going right now, what I'm hearing a lot now is that these officers just moving around in fear.
Listen, they were in fear. I got returned to the jail like 4 years ago, and it got increasingly worse, right? It got increasingly worse. These guys know this myth that you need punitive segregation. They ended it. Who knew there was even punitive segregation?
Right. Nobody knew that. I thought it was closed.
Because they were not writing, when you write people up, they wasn't sending them to punitive segregation. See, we have a lot of myths here that have happened, and everything is blaming the officer.
Right.
These officers are fearful, and that's one of the reasons I never, being an old school CO, we never made excuses for people bringing in contraband. And I don't think this is an excuse. That your department watched them on camera smoking drugs and using drugs. The department, there's video of it all over the place. Videos of this. And so now in the academy, at least when I was in the academy years ago, they taught you how to deal with an inmate that's on drugs.
Right.
If you think he's on drugs, you report him, you stand.
Exactly, yeah.
There's video of this.
Why do you think nothing is said then? If it's video everywhere, obviously.
Because then you would have to open up punitive segregation. That's counterproductive to closing Rikers Island. It's all a farce. This is just a front. If you open up punitive segregation and you start placing people in punitive segregation, better yet, when's the last time I was there again for 4 years and just recently retired? I can't recall a large amount of drug testing going on.
Right.
I can't.
Right. I don't even know if they do it anymore.
So, right.
Unless somebody says something or...
Right. Come on. We saw it. At least I saw it. I saw inmates just on the tip, smoking after smoking. The captains, the depths, the warden. Here it is, the unit that monitors the camera will call you and tell you to sit off a desk, but they didn't see the inmate smoking drugs or with weapons.
Or put a mop up or something like that, a
Right.
sponge or something like that.
Right. So we know this is something that they don't care about. So now officers who are in housing, I don't know if they still have it or not, but they were housing them according to gang affiliation.
Right.
I spoke about that 2016, 2017 at the Board of Corrections, housing them according to gang affiliation.
They claim they went, away from that. Well, I haven't really checked into it, but I guess I don't know if they completely divested from that at all. I don't know.
You know,
but it always ends up, it seems like everybody knows everyone from, I guess, from the outside world when they go inside and get incarcerated.
listen, man.
So,
like I said, you're 100% right. But where we have to get, and this is primarily for the officers, you have to sue. Unfortunately, your union is not suing, right? They're not doing what they're supposed to do. When the president of the union is thanking the mayor for showing up after an officer gets stabbed 15 times, that's why I'm here talking to you, to be quite honest with you. When you see this, and he's thanking him, and how do you, the commissioner of the department, not outraged that an officer got stabbed?
right.
15 times. And you're in violation of Nunez.
Right. Okay.
You are so in violation. Anybody that got hurt, right, with Nunez need to sue the Federal Monitor and the City of New York. The Federal Monitor is an enforcement officer. His job is to enforce Nunez.
Right.
But he's not doing that. He hasn't done that. He's become a pseudo commissioner. He's not, through his Steve Martin is his name.
Right.
He's not the commissioner of corrections. He's talking about who should be promoted. And I must say, the majority of the people he's talking about are black and Hispanic.
Right.
So black and Hispanic can't run the Department of Correction. In one of his reports, he said they're not fit to run it. What is that? This is a crisis all across the country. That there's a fight between those people who think the inmate population should get sponges and balls and computers, and that's cool. Anything that makes it easier for officers to take their posts, I'm for it.
Right.
But at the same time, there has to be discipline. How can we protect those that we're responsible for?
Right. So to be clear, the Nunez agreement was agreed with the city of New York and whatnot, and basically the court system.
Yes, they failed to enforce it. They failed to enforce it.
They failed to enforce something they agreed to.
Enforce, yes.
Yes, the department agreed to enforce.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's why they're in court.
Right.
They're in court. But the main thing is that would that officer been stabbed 15 times, right? Had he had 2-3 officers on the floor with him?
So that leaves the position open for the lawsuit.
Higher officer to inmate ratio. Right? That's what it says.
Right.
So, but how they get around it is blaming the officers for not showing up to work.
Right. Which is not justification.
Yeah, no, it's not.
Because it's not justification.
It's not a justification. No, it can be an excuse.
Right.
But it's justification. They're justifying that. But see, you ain't coming to work. Right. So we don't have the staff. Therefore, because you're not going in there, we're going to crack down on you and send an investigator to your house. But it still does not, you still are not in compliance. And because you're not in compliance, officers have gotten hurt.
Right. What you think will happen if these officers start suing?
You're going to force change the same way the inmates do. You're going to force change.
That's right, because the Nunez litigation was by inmate.
Right, and you are interested party. You are interested party. You're not a party to the litigation, but you're what's called an interested party because what they decide impacts you. And when you read Nunez, like for example, the lady that keeps talking, the one, Serena Townsend.
Right.
Nunez speaks of of what is that called? The position she held.
Oh, she was the commissioner of what?
Trials and
litigations, and commissioner of another one.
No, trials and litigation. She was in trials and investigations. Right. Right. Damn, I can't think of the third one right now. But she was in charge of 3. But it'll come to me. But what they all are held responsible when you read Nunes, it talks as if they all separated.
Right. I agree. Go to that. Should they have been? I thought they were supposed to be separate entities.
Yes.
Because you can't have investigations and commissioner of investigations being the commissioner of oath because they're not going to go against themselves.
She taints the investigation. Okay. It's a tainted investigation. It was a tainted investigation.
That's something they should have been dragged to court about.
Yes. And I'm going to be quite frank. This was one of my issues with the union as a union member. Was how are we letting her rock all of these positions?
At the time, right.
How are we letting her do this? So while she's on it, all over the place because she's she's mad or angry that she got terminated.
Right.
Right? As a lawyer, that's a conflict.
Right.
Her as a lawyer, for her to do the investigations, to set the penalties, right? So she was pretty much the judge and jury. She decided
and executioner.
Right. She decided who got rearrested, if they did or if they didn't. And so a lot of these cases I'm hearing now, they have a backlog of people not being rearrested, right? You have what was the whole putting the DA's office
on the island about? I remember that. Yeah.
What was that about?
I remember that. Yeah. I remember that. I don't know if it fell by the wayside or whatever, but I really don't hear about it no more except when it first started.
Right. Right.
When it first started.
See, I'm here not just to talk about what the issue is. I'm here to talk about what the solution is. You have to get them in court. They signed an agreement. Anyone that's gotten hurt or harmed by this failure to comply and enforce Nunes needs to go to the court, need to go to the judge and make them enforce it. There is no way that you, as a union, are asking for more officers, knowing, and they know it violates Nunes. So why aren't you doing it?
Right.
They should know that Nunes demands more staff itself.
Right. Well, the majority of officers that I've spoken to or have spoken to me about it, basically they get stuck. There's nothing I can do about it. I don't know I don't know how to start.
Get a group together of officers, and you file a suit. You have a New York City agreement, and your New York City agreement called Nunes.
Right.
The judge signed off on it. I believe it's Judge Swain, if I'm not sure, but I believe that's who it is. But there's a judge who signed off on this deal.
Right.
And now it went from being about abuse of officers to our attendants. And that narrative was pushed by the union and the commissioner.
Right.
Oh, they need to come to work. You got to come to work. These people were off the books. This is how, and if you do your research about Mr. Chiraldi, when he took over a youth facility in Washington, D.C., he took a lot of heat because the first thing he did was fire the staff without cause.
Right.
He went and said, "You're fired." Right? So what did he do here? He came in and immediately blamed the staff.
Right.
After the union, of course, kept saying, we need to go back to work, opposed to going to court and forcing them to live up to Nunes. Now, if you're not coming to work as a correction officer thinking you're going to get over and get a check, I'm not advocating it.
Right.
They need to get rid of you and bring in somebody that's going to make them be in compliance with Nunes.
Right. So basically, all they had to do was go by what's already written.
Yes. You've been out over this time. You're abusing. Boom.
Mm-hmm.
But what they didn't want to expose is that the officer had already left.
Right.
You know, you had several officers. China Williams one at meetings who kept asking, how much staff do we have?
Right.
And he read off some numbers that would show that we had minimal staff. We, when I say we, I mean the department, had on the schedule people's names that wasn't even there, who had resigned. And they had their names filling in spots. So a lot of officers were on post by themselves.
Right.
And you look, and it was Officer X who had resigned.
A long time ago.
And so the union knew that these people had resigned because the people were putting in requests for their annuity funds.
Right.
So they knew.
So basically screaming about getting more officers doesn't make sense if you're not acknowledging that these officers are gone in the first place.
Right.
Because they're gone, so they're not going, they're not coming back.
Right.
If they was out a month or 6 months or whatever, they're supposed to be terminated anyway.
How was you still paying them without a timesheet?
There you go. Okay.
How was you paying these people without a timesheet? See, what's happening is that they needed the staff. Commissioner Jacobson, former Commissioner Jacobson said,
I remember him, yeah.
Said at a Board of Correction meeting, Cobo will be fine with 3,500. The former president, Mr. Hussein, did a video on an interview that I played when I was running for president. And in it, he said, there'll always be a Cobo, whether it's 2,000, 3,000. What guy, again, the union has two functions, safety, getting and keeping jobs.
Right.
So you keep on TV saying, oh, 35, now, 3,500 people are not here. We need 3,000 more officers. They're not going to. Right. One of the reasons why this city is wrought with crime is because they don't want to put them on Rikers. It defeats their purpose of closing it.
Right.
That's why they fought tooth and nail about opening facilities. So the people, the citizens of New York City, are being violently assaulted by career dudes that's doing it over and over again because this system has decided to not protect the citizens of New York City, nor the correction officers, nor even the inmates that's on Rikers Island.
Right, because I remember seeing on the news there was a mass arrest of a gang, I believe.
Yeah, 36 people. So where they going?
They're supposed to go to Rikers Island.
All right, so if they go to Rikers, you on TV as the prosecutor screaming and yelling, we made a big arrest, right? But you won't prosecute them once they beat up a CO.
Right.
Why? Just recently, and I'm not going to say his name, but I want to wish this brother well.
Right.
He was demoted, right? He had good intentions, right? I had my differences with him.
Right.
And people called me, some people were thinking I would be happy. No, I'm saddened by that because the department didn't back him. The department didn't teach him. The department refused to acknowledge that we had a real problem and he wasn't it, nor any officer who's been beaten, spit on, had feces thrown on him.
Right.
It's the mentality that this department, you're fighting what they're doing, these people, it's a movement.
Right.
And they're fighting a movement, right? But there are things that they could do.